In the grand theater of American history, few institutions have wielded as much influence and power as the Supreme Court. Our democracy is an intricate tapestry woven with checks and balances, and at its apex stands the Supreme Court. This High Court is the final arbiter of the law, interpreting the Constitution, and its decisions shape the American society we know today. Each landmark case, like a needle threading the fabric of our nation, leaves an indelible mark on our shared history. From civil rights to the limits of executive power, from free speech to privacy, the Supreme Court's rulings echo through our lives, often in ways we may not immediately recognize. This is not a court of black and white, but of nuanced shades of interpretation, of majority and minority opinions, of dissent and consensus. And it is in this complexity that the true power of the Supreme Court lies. Join us as we journey through the corridors of time and law to explore the top 10 landmark cases in the history of the Supreme Court of the United States. Our journey begins in the year 1803 with the case of Marbury v. Madison. This case arose from a political dispute, but it ended up becoming a defining moment in American judicial history. Its significance lies not only in the dispute it settled, but also in the precedent it set. It was here that the Supreme Court, for the first time, declared an act of Congress unconstitutional, thereby establishing the principle of judicial review. Chief Justice John Marshall, writing for the majority, held that it was the role of the Supreme Court to interpret the Constitution, and that any law inconsistent with the Constitution is void. The minority opinion, however, held a different view, arguing that the Constitution didn't explicitly grant the court such power. With this case, the Supreme Court asserted its role as the final arbiter of the Constitution. Moving forward to 1819, we arrive at the case of McCulloch v. Maryland. This landmark case arose when Maryland tried to impose a tax on the second bank of the United States. The state argued that as the bank was located within Maryland, it had the right to tax it. However, the bank fought back, asserting that since it was a federal institution, it was exempt from state taxation. The Supreme Court, under Chief Justice John Marshall, sided with the bank. In the majority decision, Marshall asserted that the Constitution grants the federal government implied powers to carry out its constitutional duties, and that state action may not impede valid constitutional exercises of power by the federal government. In essence, McCulloch v. Maryland affirmed the supremacy of federal law over state law, a principle that would shape the course of the nation's future. This case affirmed the power of the federal government, shaping the nation's future. In 1857, the country was shaken by the case of Dred Scott v. Sandford. This case revolved around Dred Scott, an enslaved African-American man who sued for his freedom on the grounds that he had lived in territories where slavery was illegal. The Supreme Court, led by Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, dealt a blow to the abolitionist cause by ruling 7-2 that Scott, being black, was not a citizen, and therefore had no standing to sue in federal court. Furthermore, the court declared the Missouri Compromise unconstitutional, asserting that Congress did not have the authority to prohibit slavery in the territories. This decision inflamed tensions between the North and the South, contributing significantly to the onset of the Civil War. The dissenting opinions, penned by Justices Benjamin R. Curtis and John McLean, argued vehemently for Scott's citizenship and the constitutionality of the Missouri Compromise. This case, while infamous, underscored the stark divisions within the country. We move to 1896 for the case of Plessy v. Ferguson, a landmark case that unfortunately legitimized racial segregation in America for more than half a century. The plaintiff, Homer Plessy, was a man of mixed race who challenged Louisiana's Separate Car Act, arguing it violated the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. The Supreme Court disagreed, asserting that as long as facilities were separate but equal, segregation did not infringe on constitutional rights. Justice John Marshall Harlan was the lone dissenter, asserting in his minority opinion that the Constitution was colorblind and neither knows nor tolerates classes among citizens. The majority's ruling, however, bolstered the implementation of Jim Crow laws across the South, institutionalizing systemic racial segregation. The significance of Plessy v. Ferguson lay not only in its immediate impact, but also in the long struggle for civil rights that would follow. This case marked a low point in the court's history, but it would not be the end of the story. In 1954, the court made a groundbreaking decision in the case of Brown v. Board of Education. This landmark case challenged the notion of separate but equal established in Plessy v. Ferguson. The issue at hand? Racial segregation in public schools. The plaintiff, Oliver Brown, argued that separating black and white students inherently created an unequal learning environment. The court, led by Chief Justice Earl Warren, agreed. In a unanimous decision, they declared that segregation in public schools violated the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, effectively overturning Plessy's precedent. The dissenting voices were largely outside the court, with southern states resisting desegregation efforts. Nevertheless, the court's ruling was clear and unequivocal. This case was a monumental step forward in the battle against racial discrimination, setting the stage for the civil rights movement of the 1960s. It underscored the Supreme Court's role in shaping societal norms and enforcing constitutional rights. This case marked a turning point in the fight for civil rights. In 1973, the court made a decision that continues to spark debate, the case of Roe v. Wade. This landmark case was about a woman's right to choose. An anonymous Jane Roe filed a lawsuit against Henry Wade, the district attorney of Dallas County, Texas, challenging the state's abortion laws. The issue at the heart of the case, whether the Constitution protected a woman's right to terminate her pregnancy. The court, in a 7-2 decision, ruled in favor of Roe, stating that the right to privacy under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment extended to a woman's decision to have an abortion. But not everyone agreed. The two dissenting justices argued that the court was overstepping its bounds and that the issue should be left to individual states. The significance of Roe v. Wade cannot be overstated. It affirmed a woman's right to choose and sparked a nationwide debate that continues to this day. This case remains one of the most contentious in the court's history. In 1974, the Supreme Court faced a presidential crisis in United States versus Nixon. At the heart of this case was a subpoena issued by the Watergate special prosecutor, demanding that President Nixon release tape recordings and documents related to certain discussions with aides. Nixon refused, citing executive privilege. The court, however, unanimously ruled against Nixon. The majority opinion, penned by Chief Justice Warren Burger, held that executive privilege is not absolute. While it exists, it could not be invoked to protect criminal conduct or to withhold evidence in a criminal prosecution. The decision was significant, for it reaffirmed the principle that no one, not even the President of the United States, is above the law. It was a crucial moment in American jurisprudence, one that fortified the system of checks and balances by asserting the judiciary's power to limit the executive's authority. This case underscored the power of the judiciary in maintaining checks and balances. In recent history, the 2015 case of Obergefell v. Hodges made waves. This landmark case revolved around the right to same-sex marriage, challenging state laws that denied marriage and recognition to same-sex couples. The plaintiffs were 14 same-sex couples and 2 men whose partners were deceased. Their argument was simple yet profound. They believed the 14th Amendment requires a state to license a marriage between 2 people of the same sex. The Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, agreed with them. Justice Anthony Kennedy, writing for the majority, affirmed that the right to marry is a fundamental right inherent in the liberty of the person. The minority, however, disagreed, arguing that the court was overstepping its bounds and that the issue should be decided by individual states. This case marked a significant step forward for LGBTQ+ rights. It affirmed love's freedom, equality's reach, and demonstrated the power of the courts to shape and affirm our nation's commitment to equal dignity. From Marbury v. Madison to Obergefell v. Hodges, the Supreme Court's decisions have shaped the fabric of American society. These landmark cases are not just footnotes in legal textbooks, they have had real, tangible impacts on the lives of millions of people. They've defined the scope of individual rights, delineated the balance of power between federal and state governments, and shaped societal norms and values. The cases we've discussed today, from Marbury's establishment of judicial review to Obergefell's affirmation of same-sex marriage, have transformed our understanding of the Constitution and the rule of law. They've sparked debates, fueled movements, and brought about significant social changes. The Supreme Court's decisions are more than just legal judgments. They're reflections of the evolving societal values and the struggles for justice. They're the milestones in our nation's journey towards a more perfect union. As we continue to move forward, the Supreme Court will undoubtedly continue to play a pivotal role in defining the contours of American law and society.